And what has been my crime? My crime has been to confess publicly Christ as Savior.
The signs are rapidly fulfilling.
Good evening. Sabbath blessings to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you in this forum. As has been said, I was to share last month, but just due to some circumstances, I wasn't able to. But I'm thankful to have this opportunity this evening to share with you. So you can see that my title is Country Living and Homeschooling, and there's a reason why I put it that way around, and you'll find out more as I go along. Right. So I want to start off by just sharing some principles from the Bible, just to establish clearly the basis for some of the things that I'm going to share with you. Yeah. And I'm going to go right back to the beginning, back to Genesis, because it's really at the beginning that we can establish our principles for both country living and homeschooling. So when we look at the first two chapters of the Bible, which incidentally are the only two chapters of the Bible that deal with a perfect world, we recognize that man was created for a purpose. We see that when you look at the creation account, and as you go through the days of creation, God was creating this wonderful natural environment, and this would serve then as a part of man's education, in order for him to achieve the purpose that he was created for. We see that parents then were to raise their children in this environment and educate them according to this purpose. Yes. So I'm just looking here. If you've got your Bibles with you, I'm just going to refer to some of the scriptures here. So by the time God came to create man, this is Genesis 1:26, he had already made the environment for him. And then from verse 26, then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over everything that moves on the earth. So when we look at those verses there, and we understand then something of God's purpose, God's plan in the creation of man, yes? And man was to have a specific role in the creation, having dominion over the earth, like a sovereign king over the whole earth. And when we go to chapter 2, chapter 2 ends with the creation of the woman. And you notice there at the end, verse 20, this is chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So it was God's plan then that from this first couple, they would have children who would then have children, and the same lifestyle, the same purpose that God had for them would be passed on from one generation to the next. When we go to Genesis 3, we come to the fall, and even though sin came in, God still wanted man to live in a natural environment and to educate children according to his purpose, which now included, of course, the redemption purpose. Yes. So even though Adam and Eve were put out of the Garden of Eden, we believe that the earth would still have been a beautiful place, and they would establish their home, have children, and enjoy the benefits of the natural environment. Though now it was marred by sin because of the curse, this was still God's the best environment for man to live in and for the raising of children. So from the beginning then, country living and home education go hand in hand. Yes, we can see that. Interestingly, when we come to Genesis chapter 4 and we come to the story of Cain and Abel, it's interesting that after Cain kills his brother and he goes out from the presence of the Lord, this is chapter 4, from verse 16 actually. So he goes out from the presence of the Lord, and then it says verse 17, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son Enoch. So it's interesting here then that Cain, having gone away from God's purpose, even with the sacrifice that he brought, which was not acceptable, and then he goes on to murder his brother. Now, as he goes out from the presence of the Lord, he builds this city. Yes. Now we don't know what that city was like, but it's just interesting. That's the first time the word city is used in the Bible, and it's in connection with Cain. And when you go on in chapter 4, I think it's the 5th generation, you come to Lamech, in verse 19. Lamech, two wives, the name of one was Ada, the name of the second Zillah. So we see polygamy coming in then, and then the chapter ends then with Lamech, verse 23. Then Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zilhah, hear my voice, wives of Lamech, listen to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, even a young man for hurting me. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. So, and it seems if for what he says there in comparing himself there to Cain, that this would have been murder that I would gather. So you see then Cain building a city, and these developments now in his line from the 5th generation, yes, polygamy and murder. And then now, as we journey through the Bible, we see that the faithful patriarch, those who came now from the line of Seth, who was born as like a replacement for Abel, evidently they would have lived in a rural, natural environment, yes? And I suppose most people would have lived in that way back then, and even what was called cities probably wouldn't be comparable to what we call cities today. And then when we come to Deuteronomy chapter 6, we're familiar with these instructions that God gave through Moses to parents. And chapter 6, perhaps I'll ask if somebody'd like to read for me verses 4 to 9. If anybody'd like to read that. No? Okay.
Okay, I could read.
Yes, please.
Give me that reference again. Genesis chapter...
Oh, no, this is Deuteronomy 6, 4 to 9.
Sorry. Deuteronomy 6, 4 to 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command you this day shall be in thine heart. And thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and thou shalt talk to them when thou sittest in the house, and when thou walkest by the way, when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thy hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and upon thy gates.
Thank you. So evidently then, parents were instructed to educate their children in the statutes and commandments of God. And this was in and out of the home context. So wherever they were, the statutes, the commands of God were being taught, being reinforced in the hearts and minds of their children. But this is very much then children being educated in the home context. And then, of course, we come to Proverbs 22:6. We're familiar with this. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And I believe that this training would require the right environment to make it effective. Yes. So a part of the way would include the right environment that children were to be trained in. Now, I want to look at two examples here. And I want just to notice here the parents of John the Baptist, Zacharias and Elizabeth, and Luke 1:39. If you remember, after Mary was visited by the angel Gabriel, she went to see Elizabeth, who I believe was already pregnant with John the Baptist. And it's just interesting to note where Zacharias and Elizabeth lived, because it says, Luke 1:39, now Mary arose in those days and went into the hill country with haste to a city of Judah. So it was in the hill country, again, city, probably not what we would call a city today, but they were in the hill country. And after John the Baptist was born, it says in 80, so the child grew and became strong in spirit and was in the deserts till the day of his manifestation to Israel. He was in the desert. And we don't have a lot of detail about the early life of John the Baptist, but you can gather that he was living a life quite separate from the world. And when it says that he was in the deserts, this is suggesting that he was away from the populated areas. And of course, he was being prepared to do a special work that God had for him. Yes, but it required that he be separated, from the busy, populous areas, away from negative influences, as much, of course, as is possible, because there's negative influences wherever you are. And then when we come to Jesus, so Luke 2:39 and 40. So after they've taken Jesus to the temple, that's when he was about 6 weeks old. He says, so when they performed all things according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city, Nazareth. And the child grew and became strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. So I think the same term is used there, strong in spirit. And I was thinking of that, I believe it was this week, because I'm going through Luke in my devotion. What does that look like, a child growing strong in spirit? Yes. But this is how Jesus grew. But interestingly, Nazareth, now, when Jesus was calling his disciples and Nathanael was told about Jesus coming from Nazareth, what did he say? He says, Nazareth, can anything good come from there? So it seems as if Nazareth had somewhat of a reputation. And I thought this was interesting because perhaps there was a difference between the environment that John the Baptist was raised in and the one that Jesus was raised in. But nonetheless, both sets of parents did a faithful work. And so this is showing perhaps that it's not just about the environment. It's not all about country living. It has very much to do with the home, the parents, and who the parents are in terms of their characters. And it tells us then that Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And this took place as he was growing up there in Nazareth. Yes. All right, then. So I want to come then to say a little bit about our country living journey, my wife Kizawanda and myself. Early experiences of the countryside. I was trying to think where to start here, but I grew up in Birmingham, and ironically, I'm doing this presentation from Birmingham because I'm visiting my mother, and I'm near the heart of the city. But this is where I grew up in Birmingham, and when I was 18, I went to university in Aberystwyth in Wales, and it's just interesting how I ended up there, because if my grades had been slightly different in my A levels, I would have gone probably to a bigger town or city, university. But I ended up in Aberystwyth. I don't know how many of you know Aberystwyth. It's on the west coast of Wales, and it's a university town. It's also a kind of a tourist town as well. But compared to Birmingham, for me, when I went there at 18, it was very small. And I remember going on the train from Birmingham, and it was like the end of the line. You were right there by the sea. And for me, it was too much. I didn't like it. And in fact, I tried to get a transfer during my first year to go somewhere else, but I couldn't get through with that. So I ended up spending 3 years in Aberystwyth. And by the end, I think something began to rub off on me. For 2 of the years that I was there, I lived literally maybe 3 minutes from the sea, because I lived in the town for 2 of the years. But I didn't really appreciate nature and the benefits of living in a quieter environment. But strangely, when I finished, I was impressed during my 3rd year to take a year out. I was going to carry on further studies, but I was impressed to take a year out and become a student missionary. And I had it in mind to go perhaps to Africa, or I think somewhere in Asia, but because I applied late, the only place that they had suitable was to work at a mission school in Arizona in America, for American Indian. These were Navajo Indians. So I ended up going there, and it was a school located in the desert. So I'm coming from Aberystwyth, and now I'm going to this little place in the desert in Arizona on the west side of America to work at this school with Navajo Indian children. Well, I was supposed to spend 10 months there, but I left early. There were some problems there. I providentially didn't find myself. The Lord took me to the other side of America, to Georgia. Well, I stopped off on the way because my parents were living in America at the time in New York. So I stopped off there for a while, and very providentially, I'll have to tell you this story another time. I ended up at a place called Wildwood. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's a medical missionary institute. And that was in the countryside. It's on the border between Georgia and Tennessee. And after 1 week there, I mean, it took me about a day on the bus from New York to go down there. But after about a week, I was ready to leave. I didn't think it had what I was looking for. But again, providentially, something happened. I went to a meeting the night before I was to leave, and what I heard there caused me to stay for 1 year. So I was there living then in the countryside. I lived off the campus, so it was rural, and I began to appreciate and enjoy the countryside more and more. And I think by the time I came back to this country, it was my settled purpose that I would live in the countryside. Though when I came back, I lived in London because I came back to work in an evangelistic meeting which Mark Finley was doing. I was doing Bible work. And then in God's providence, he took me to John Loughborough School. And I ended up spending 7 years in living in London, West London, Hounslow. And that's where I met Gabrielle through the Chiswick Church in West London. Anyway, it was always my purpose, still eventually to go to the countryside, and I didn't see myself living in London. But just a word here, because I don't know if there are any single people in the session this evening, but sometimes people who are single might think they don't want to move out by themselves. They prefer if they were married, and that's, I can understand that. And I think I was a bit of that mind myself. But looking back, I wished I'd moved out earlier. But anyway, we learn as we go along. So I eventually left London and I came back to the Midlands. I actually came to Wolverhampton, and when I came back, it was my plan to live outside of the city, but somebody offered me a place in Wolverhampton to live, and I guess maybe because of my financial situation, it was convenient. So I ended up living in Wolverhampton. And again, I look back at that and say, perhaps I stayed there longer than I should have. Anyway, I got married in 2006. And before I got married, I spent about a year in Jamaica. That's where my wife is from. And as much as possible, I tried to live in the countryside. So I lived in the countryside in Portland, in Mandeville, and a place outside of the Spanish Town area, up in the hills. So that was always my direction, the countryside. Whenever I'd visit friends, I got to know like Jack and Joy, and I would visit them periodically, and I always enjoyed those times in the countryside. And again, just always, it's almost like I was gravitating naturally to the countryside. That's where I was heading. But when we got married got married in Jamaica, and when we came back here, pretty much straight away, we began to search for country properties. Yes, we had a big plan in mind to get like a big property where we would do like an education, health center. But I think the Lord had other smaller plans for us as a start. But we would spend we'd have these days, usually Sundays, where we'd go out and visit maybe 6 properties in a day. And this was all in Wales, in the kind of the middle part of Wales, though covering quite a wide area. And so we'd take our food with us, and we'd drive out, and we'd visit these properties. And in doing this, we were getting to know the area, getting to appreciate the Welsh countryside. So yes, we had these trips to Wales. Then 2008, we still hadn't moved yet. We were still in Wolverhampton. And if you remember, there was the time of the financial crash. And in Wolverhampton at the time, there was a lot of focus on this in the churches by certain individuals, and they were doing programs to do prophecy and where things were going. So again, people were quite awakened on this matter of country living. And but we had already been looking into this, like I said, from 2006. And we were looking to buy a property, which was taking time because we were looking for something larger than we would get from selling the house that we had, or would cost significantly more. But something happened to push us along, and I re-looked at the matter of whether we need to buy, and whether maybe the quickest way to get out was to rent out our home in Wolverhampton and then rent a place in the countryside. Now, sorry, I've got to let me just, I'm just going to skip to the next slide for a reason. It's got a statement on here. This goes back to 2008. I remember one Sabbath at church in Wolverhampton. This is again 2008, when there was all this talk about the financial crash and, you know, the need to get out to the cities. And my Sabbath school class was at the front of the church, this Wolverhampton Central. And I remember when the brother came up to do the personal ministry spot, he, amongst other things that he said, he read this statement or part of this statement from early writings. And because I was sitting at the very front, though it's a big church, I think it was on the front row, and he's there at the front. He's almost like he was just speaking to me. And this statement here from the book Early Writings, especially where it says, let's just have a look. I think you may have read all of it, but I was shown that it is the will of God that the saints should cut loose from every encumbrance before the time of trouble and make a covenant with God through sacrifice. If they have their property on the altar and earnestly inquire of God for duty, he will teach them when to dispose of these things. Then they will be free in the time of trouble and have no clogs to weigh them down. And it was like he was just reading this to me, because I was sitting there at the front. And around that time, and I think with the influence of this statement, we decided that instead of trying to sell our property and then buy one, we'll just rent it out and rent a property in Wales. So this kind of speeded us up. And so let me just go back to this slide here. Where were we going to locate? It came down to a choice between Brecon, which is kind of more towards the south. It's in the same county, Powys, but further south, or in the new town, which kind of like is the mid Wales area. And there was a property in Brecon that it was a barn conversion. It had just been done out. My wife was very keen on it. For some reason, I wasn't so keen, not because of the house itself, but because of the immediate environment. I mean, it was rural, but there were, you know, some of these barn conversions, like a courtyard. She got I think it was about 3 or 4 properties, and they were still doing some work on 1 or 2 of them. So it was kind of quite busy with building work. And I think there was a kind of a raging brook or stream very close by. So I wasn't that keen, but I didn't say much to my wife because she was keen, and we actually started the process to acquire that property. We were going to rent it. But I think it was now towards the end of 2008, and in the back of my mind, I wasn't fully convinced about it. There was another property which is more in the mid Wales area that we had looked at, and I said to him, I wanted to have another look at it. I don't remember whether we did actually go to have another look at it, but we were still looking at properties that were, you know, up for rent. So though we were proceeding with this one, we were still, you know, checking around. And my wife, she found this property. Well, she saw it the first time, and I think there weren't many pictures, and so she didn't give it much attention. Then she saw it on the website again, and there were more pictures, and it looked quite, you know, quite attractive, you know. So we thought we'd go and have a look at it. And the property was town of Ron. And when we went to see it, and we looked at the price of it, the location of it, we both became convinced that this is the one that we should take. And so, and I was even able to negotiate with the landlord to knock the rent down a bit, and he was willing to do that. So we took that property, and we moved in February 2009. Now, I've got some pictures of it, which I will show you. Let's see. But let me carry on if you don't mind, and I'll come to the pictures. Yeah, so we moved in, and I just remember one interesting thing, and it was that when we moved there, it was such a contrast the way we were living in Wolverhampton. We were living in like a row of terrace houses. Though I should say, where we lived in Wolverhampton, we were kind of on the edge of it. So we could actually walk about maybe 10-15 minutes and get out on the canal, and you'd be out into the countryside. And we did make the best of that while we were in Wolverhampton. But I remember one day, just before we moved out, we were walking there. It was actually by the canal in Wolverhampton. And we were kind of thinking what it's going to be like to live in the countryside. But when we did actually move, it was just so natural. It's like my heart was already there before we got there. So I was just so at home. There was no big adjustment. People might think there's no street lights, the shops aren't nearby, but there was no major adjustment needed. I was in my natural environment, if you like. Yeah. Now, I should say we went there with country living in mind, not so much ministry, though I've always had an interest in ministry, during my Christian experience, Bible studies, and through the education work as well. But this developed as we well, fairly soon actually. So I'm just bringing this in because in thinking about country living, it's not just about getting out of the city into the countryside, but for what purpose? Where does God want you? Why does he want you there? Yes, it is to get the benefits of the countryside, but he has a work for you to do, a purpose for you. And we didn't have that uppermost in our mind. I mean, I guess we just assume that wherever we are, we will minister, as opportunity comes. And opportunities did come. And the Lord, took us in some interesting directions. And one of them was working with other Christians. There was no Adventist presence when we went there. There was another family who moved into a neighboring village, an Adventist family, about 3.5 miles away. I think they might have come just after us, or around the same time. But there was no church group there. So those of us that were there, and then there was another family that came we moved in the February 2009. Another family came in the August, and there was a retired minister living in another village about 12 miles from us. We had met him during our property searching, and he was quite keen for Adventists to come out because he wanted to see if we could do some work there. So within less than a year, there was a few families, in some of the surrounding villages. We started to meet up for prayer meetings in homes, but we never had a Sabbath meeting. What we did, Kizu and myself, and the Lord brought certain things to me, and I was impressed in terms of ministry, because here we were as people of color moving into mid Wales, where there's not many, black people, and in the cities, generally, there's larger populations of minority people, and often our church growth comes through minority people, but we didn't have that in Mid Wales. And so I was impressed to go to the people who are closest to us, and these would be other Christians. And we started a ministry, if you like, with other Christians. We'd visit the chapels, the churches, and soon the doors opened for me to preach in some of these Sunday churches, Baptist church, and there was what's the other one? Gone from me. So yeah, so some of the churches there, United Reform was another one, and we had some very precious opportunities, to share with other Christians. It's as if we came there to share, if you like, present truth with people who had a foundation. They were Christians and believers, but the light of present truth hadn't come there. And so we had many wonderful opportunities to share with people through this ministry. Now, eventually, we started a church group. It was about 5 families. That was 2010. Started a church group there, and that group is still going on to now. Our son Seth was born in 2013. He was actually born in the house where we live, and as I said, we were renting this house for quite a while. We were quite at home there, though we were looking around at. Okay, before comes out, let me just say, early 2013, I approached the landlord and I asked him if he'd be willing to sell the property to us, and the way he responded, he made it clear that there was basically no way that he was going to sell this property to us. His parents lived on the farm. Well, around where we live, we're surrounded by farmland, which belongs to his father. His parents live on the farm, the farmhouse just above where we live. And they've been a long-established family in that community, though he, as a landlord, he wasn't living locally. He lives down south. But anyway, he made it very clear that he wouldn't consider selling the property. So we were looking elsewhere then, because we did want to buy something for ourselves eventually. So we were looking around, but when he said to me that he wouldn't sell it, and he was so definite about it, something came to me, and I said to the Lord, if he wants us to have this place, we will have it. And what I can't remember how I put it, but it was basically I put it to the Lord that if work it out, how did I put it? Let me just think. It was if the landlord comes back to me and says he's willing to sell, then I'll know this place is for us. Something like that I put to the Lord, or the Lord brought to me. But it looked as if there was no chance of it happening because he was so definite that he wasn't going to sell. Anyway, it was 2014. I think it was about July. I called the landlord. It was just on a routine matter, something to do with the house. And he said to me, he asked me if I'm still interested in the house, buying the house. I said, yes. He said he'd be willing to sell it. Right. But it was a long journey from there. I think what I'll do, I've got a few more points here, but I thought, let me just go to some of the pictures so you get a bit more context, and I'll come back to the story of how we got the place. Yeah, that's my last point. Yeah. So this is where we are then. This is our hometown of Ron. It's about 5 miles outside of Newtown, which is like the main town in Mid Wales. We're pretty much by ourselves. I don't know if you can notice, just to the left of the house, there's a little cottage next door where somebody lives. A lady lives there, but that's our closest neighbor. These are just some of the views. That's at the front. You see a bit there of our gardening patch. This is up our lane. And I remember, I think the first time when we found the place, and we went for walks on the lane, we just walked, you know, and it just looked so attractive. This is on the left, that's the hill around the corner. That's where I do my exercise in the mornings. And then the hill on the right going down, that's going down to the village. So we're just outside of a village called Borkafried. And that's the entrance to our place. Another view of the lane. Yeah, so this is when Kiss was pregnant. And so we were already there then, established in the rural environment, in the countryside, before Seth was born. And interestingly, just going back to the principles I shared at the beginning of creation, you notice that God provided man with his home environment, planted the Garden of Eden for them before procreation took place. Yeah, I know it doesn't always happen that way around. And of course, if you already have children and you're in the city, then country living is still, you know, still for you. Seth was actually born in the house where we live. The room he was born in is actually his bedroom now. And there I am with him when he was probably just weeks old. And I remember he was born in October. I remember taking him out for my walks, and sometimes the weather was very cold, and the kids might have wondered why I'm taking him out. But I'd have him on the what do you call it, on my front, and we'd take him out on my walks. And I think, you know, just from there, he just became so natural for the rural environment, you know, having been born into it. So I'm gonna, before I come on to the homeschooling side specifically, I'm just looking at the time. I just wanted to give you a quick version of how we acquired the place. So like I said, 2014, the landlord said he was willing to sell, but we had to sell our property in Wolverhampton first because we and it took a long process for different reasons, and by the time and there were a number of setbacks. I mean, part of it was financial, because it was going to be significantly more than the property we were getting for the property we were selling in Wolverhampton. But we were in the process anyway, with solicitors involved, but it was just taking a long time. And when we eventually got sorted out, and we came up to the point now where we had sorted out the mortgage, everything was sorted, worked out with the solicitor. I remember, I can't remember whether the solicitor called me or I called the solicitor, but just at that point now, we're willing to go forward now and just exchange and so on. The solicitor said that the seller, who is our landlord, is not selling to us anymore. He's selling to somebody else. And you know, we didn't know anything about that. We knew it was a long, drawn-out process, but he never said anything to us about it, and we were kind of surprised. And I remember the day on which I was told that, and I remember going for a walk, and somebody flashed into my, just very, very, just flashed in and out of my mind. And I think it was the same, maybe the next day or so, I spoke to the landlord and asked him, you know, what's happening. And he mentioned that he said something like his solicitor didn't hear from our solicitor, so he just thought we weren't going ahead and he was going to sell to somebody else. And he mentioned the person, and that was the person that had flashed into my mind. Now that he's selling to somebody else, he's not selling to us. What do we do? Well, that person, because I know the person said, if we want to stay there, when they get the place, they'll still rent it out to us. But in my mind, I knew this place is for us and we will get this place, yeah, though everything looks against us. I remember the chap that came to do the valuation in connection with our mortgage, yes, is the same man that came back to do the evaluation for this other person now who was to buy the place. And he was wondering what's going on because he thought we were buying it. Now, you know, but anyway, I was very settled in my mind that we will have this place. And the person was going ahead then with the property to buy the property. I remember one day I was out on I'd done some work away from home, and I was on my way back, and I was thinking the whole thing through. And when I got back, I said to kids, I said, we will soon acquire this property. Now, there was no evidence that we would, because the seller is not selling to us, he's selling to somebody else. That person is going forward. I have to cut a long story short. But a strange thing happened. I got a statement from the bank that I was to get the mortgage from, and it was a mortgage statement basically giving an account of what had gone out of my account in mortgage payments. And I thought, this is strange. And I called them and they said the mortgage is in place. And I didn't tell them anything about what was going on. And I think around that time, something happened one morning. Now, I'm not a person to open the Bible and just read things and just take it for me. But for some reason, I can't remember how it happened exactly. It's in my diary from 2018. But my eyes went to a text one morning. I wasn't looking for anything particular, but it just went to a text. And it's Psalms 125, verse 3. For the scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous, lest the righteous reach out their hand to iniquity. And it was that part about the scepter of wickedness shall not rest upon the land allotted to the righteous. And I thought this house is allotted to us, you know, yet somebody else is, you know. Anyway, shortly after, I spoke to the person that was to buy, because I know the person. I'd spoken to them about the matter, and I just asked them. I can't remember whether they called me or how we got talking, but they told me they're no longer going ahead with it. They can't manage it basically, so they're pulled out. And then the landlord came back to us and said, "Are you still interested?" I said, "Yeah." And we went forward from there and acquired the property. Now your experience may not be the same, but that's a bit of, you know, how it went for us. And so it was early 2019 when we acquired the property. Though strangely, the mortgage payments had been going out. There's another part of the story, but I won't go into that. It's a long story. But the Lord worked it out anyway that we acquired the property. Now, just if I can just move quickly to the homeschooling part. I know the time is going. So, like I said, the environment ideally would come first, and then the children, the homeschooling. Yes. So just a little bit about our homeschooling then, and you can see how it relates to the countryside. So what we're doing in our homeschooling with Seth, I'd say it's generally based on the sources of learning given by God at creation. Okay. And these sources of learning we see in the Word of God, nature, work, and experiences, carrying out real life learning assignments. So when you look at the creation of man, what God gave him to do, you can look at it in terms of a number of learning assignments: dominion over the animals, multiplying, filling the earth, subduing the earth, eating a plant-based diet, dressing and keeping the garden, Eve to help Adam, choosing not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, living in marriage relationships, establishing homes, running families, parents training and teaching their children, experiencing the blessings of the seventh day. Now, this is just a summary of the things that God gave to man there at the beginning. And you can look at them as learning assignments, because as man did these things, there'd be lots of opportunities for learning and development. It's learning in the context of real life. And we've sought to base our homeschooling on this approach to a large extent. Yeah. So Seth has had, many and varied experiences, and these are just some pictures here. So on the left, he's learning something about the body. I think it's about the lungs he's learning there. He's got a worm there. You can see him on the right, looking at insects, helping rake up the leaves there in the garden. These are some radishes. I think he grew these. I think this was last year. Grew these radishes, very nice to eat. You can eat the leaves as well. And here he's doing some work for one of the elderly members of our church, helping her with her garden. Again, this is so we do quite a lot of gardening, and these are some. I think those are either lettuces or spinaches that he's got there on the left, and he's picking beans there on the right. Doing some on the left. He's doing I think some kind of experiment he was doing with my wife at home, helping with the vacuuming. Experiences in nature. We've got cows around, and he likes cows. He also likes to be creative. This is the steps to our home, and he thought he would make a rail for grandma when she comes to visit. And so he made this rail here. So he likes to create things. So we like to give him opportunity to do this, and allow him, the freedom to be creative. He's helping me here with some work in the office. Again, he's making some kind of vehicle there. This is something he doesn't do so much now, but he liked to do these kind of things, using whatever he's got. This was a visit to the local textile museum in the town, and here you can see him doing a bit of sewing. So we're trying to teach him in the context of real life things. He likes cooking. You can see him peeling some potatoes there on the left, and on the right, this is an outreach that we had from our church group in the town, and he's helping mom there with the food. And these, I think, were some of the people that were participating. So yeah, just coming back then to these principles. So the Word of God then is really the foundation for his homeschooling, and so the Word of God comes into his devotions. I've done quite a lot with him for his devotions in terms of Bible characters, biography. So I'll just read a few verses each night or each morning on a particular Bible character, and we look for lessons that we can learn. So we've gone through the book of Job, we've done Jeremiah, and I just take little bits of it and just teach lessons from it. For worship, we've been going through the Bible from the time that he was born. We've been going through the Bible about 7 verses a day. We were doing the Old and New Testament in parallel. We finished the New Testament. We just started the book of Ezra in the Old Testament, and I prepare just simple things for him to be able to do or to so I'll try to use like maps, illustrations, or picture cards. I've got these little cards. They're actually business cards, and my old business cards, and I use the blank sides of them to do little pictures that I would use with the Bible verses that we were looking at, just to bring the stories alive. And then I try to give some practical lesson that we can take from those verses. And it's quite challenging, when you're going through some of the passages in the Bible, like the Chronicles, and you're going through these lists of names. What lessons can you draw? But there's always something that I can find to share with, to bring out. And basically, he's seeing the great controversy theme as it unfolds through Scripture, the conflict between Christ, Satan, good and evil, and so on. Yeah. And then he has his Bible lessons, which my wife does with him. And we've used Sunlight, and we also use some other Bible lessons as well with him. So this is the Word of God. And of course, we try to reinforce it as we go through the day, the things that he has learned in the worship or in his devotion time. And trying to encourage also his prayer life. I'll say a bit more about his prayers in a bit. Now, we're living in the countryside, so nature is all around us. From the time that Seth started walking, he's been walking. Seth can walk for hours, and he wants to walk more. Sometimes I think he must be the most walked child in Wales. He just loves walking. Plants, we're surrounded by trees, so he can learn about the trees, the flowers, the different vegetable plants that we grow, animals, and just coming back to the plants, it's nice to see the seasonal changes with the plants. So like about late January, we got the snowdrops, the little white flowers, they're bulbs, and they start shooting. You start seeing their shoots. Sometimes the snow is there and they're shooting up. And we see this pattern year after year. The snowdrops come first, then the daffodils start shooting up, and then other wildflowers start coming. So he's used to seeing, these seasonal changes in nature. Animals around, I mentioned the cows. We've got sheep surrounding us on the farmland surrounding us. There's rabbits around, but we don't want them around because they're eating our vegetables. We've got pheasants, there's squirrels, and various types of insects. We've got birds. In fact, there's a hole in the wall, one of the walls of our house, the outer wall, and some blue tits, they've made a home there. And for the past few years, we see the parents flying in and out, taking food to the young ones inside. And it's just very interesting. To see this pattern. Sometimes Seth, he's trying to look into the hole. I said, no, don't look in because you might disturb them. And there's many object lessons that, you can learn from nature, and you can integrate this into the Bible teaching as well. That should say stream, not steam. There's a stream just across the field from the house, and we almost every day we go down there because it's quite steep, and we go down there after we have our meal. And Seth, it's always something to do at the stream. He likes walking. There's a lot of fallen trees over the stream, so he likes balancing, crossing over the stream on logs. Sabbath walks is like the highlight of his week, and we try to find different walks each Sabbath. Living in the countryside, there's always a new walk somewhere that you can find, and we're always looking for new walks, especially for our Sabbath walk. And then we have nature books for him to sort of, where we can do a bit more research on some of the things that we see around us in nature, and of course many lessons coming from nature. And I'll just move through the last one very quickly. Work, basically try to get him involved in whatever work we're doing age appropriately. Domestic work, cooking. I do a domestic inventory with him where we're going through everything in the house and documenting. He does pictures of them, he writes the name. We're examining the condition of them. Are they okay? Do they need changing? And so on. Home repair, whatever I'm doing, I try to get him involved, whether it's painting or fixing the bath or something. He likes mechanical things. Gardening, I've mentioned. We have a job we do on Mondays, and we're doing the bins. That's for the recycling, and we try to recycle as much as we can. And we have two compost heaps that we're keeping, and we use that for our gardening. And office work, I get him involved when I'm doing my computer work. I'll show you some pictures of this in a moment. And then he's got his daily chores. He sets the table for breakfast, for lunch, and he puts out the breakfast things on the tray. He's got his Sabbath jobs that he does, watering the plants, emptying the bins, getting his clothes out, and so on. So plenty of opportunities for him to work. And then the fourth one, experiences, many and varied experiences, visiting different places, meeting new people, visiting grandma here in Birmingham. Accidents can be an experience. One evening I was on the way to Birmingham with him, and it was November last year, and the car had a problem, and we had to pull off the motorway. The police came to help us, and fortunately the junction where we broke down was near to where our minister lives in Wolverhampton, and I called him and he came and towed us to Birmingham. So these are just experiences of life that are all learning opportunities, especially when it happens for the first time, for young children, first time encounters, service to others. So we try to give him opportunities where appropriate to help and minister to others, starting in the home. There's a street ministry that I started last year, and I've got him involved in that. And answers to prayer. He likes to pray. And when anything needs fixing or we lose something, he's quick to say, let's pray. And sometimes I remember I was doing the fence 2 summers ago, and you got these hooks that you've got to put into the fence for the wire fencing. And sometimes they'd fall into the grass, the tall grass, and it can be very difficult to find it. And he'd say, let's pray. And in my mind, I'd say, Lord, you have to answer this prayer. And we would search and search, and we'd find it. And even, I think it was last week, there's an old lawnmower, I'll show you a picture of it, that wasn't working. And from last year, it hasn't been working. And I thought, let me open it up anyway, just to have a look inside, not with much hope in mind getting it working. And he suggested prayer. We prayed, and I couldn't get it open. And then I just finally found a way to open it, took the top off, and I saw there's an electrical part out of place. I reconnected it, and it started. And Seth, of course, was very excited. Social interaction, these are other experiences as well. So just some more pictures. There's the lawnmower that we managed to get started. We are doing some weeding there on the right, weeding between the garlics that we planted late last year. So they've been in over winter, but the weeds have come in quite thick there. So we're doing some weeding this past week. This is him helping with some of the office work. He's filing bank statements. I'm trying to get rid of my old bank statements from 2016 and earlier and keeping the latest ones. So I'm getting him to put them all in order, date, order. And so this gives him a bit of, learning for his reading and just organizing things. And there he's stapling some of them together. This is one of our Sabbath walks. And these were some people we met not too long ago, one of our Sabbath walks. Interesting conversation with them. There he is on the left, walking through these dry grasses, and this is the farmer from the farm on top. He came down to plow up our land for our vegetable patch, and then meeting up with other homeschooling families. So on the left, there's another family in our church, and then on the right, this is a boy from another family. That's actually Jack and Joy's grandson. So my wife met up with his mother, and he's Levi, and they met up for a day. Then this is his Sabbath school on the left with some of the other children. I think another Sabbath walk there on the right. And this is a greenhouse that I've been working on. I haven't got it up yet, but Seth has been very much involved from the beginning. This is where we were getting the base in place with the help from another church brother. And then on the right, we're reaping carrots. That was last season. And then this is in Birmingham. So on the right, that's Seth with my mother, his grandmother. and he had some interesting experiences with her. When he was younger, we used to put him in her bed to get him to sleep before we went to bed, and they would be up talking. she at 95 or so, him at 5, and they're having this conversation. And then on the right, this was a street ministry in Birmingham that when I'm in Birmingham, sometimes I'll pop and visit them, and they give out literature. So I took Seth there one Sabbath. He likes these practical things. As I said, we're smashing up this old piano, which we had to get rid of, and then there was an organ as well, and he enjoyed that. This is a street ministry I do in mid Wales, and a couple of the young men that come along, and so Seth has been along with us as well. We do this in some of the towns around mid Wales. And this is Seth's 8th birthday. We took him to he went to Montgomery Castle, and this was at Aberdaron. We went there last September, and we were checking out this old vehicle that was going into the sea that you see there on the left. He likes to do these daring things. So there he is with Mom. This was at Aberdaron as well, somewhere by the sea, and we were crossing this this kind of water channel that was going into the sea. And this is actually when we were going to Aberdaron, and we stopped off to eat, and we met some people who had this old wagon, which Seth found quite interesting. So we've got a few pictures here. But just finally, with all that I've said, most important thing is character. And the whole thing about country living then is to do with character. Our characters as parents, as older ones, as well as our children's characters. And it's very important. So with all the beautiful things and the blessings of the countryside, it cannot of itself develop that character. Of course, this character can only be developed through Christ. And the environment can help. It can be like an aid, but we have to do our work faithfully as parents. So learning the lessons of obedience, or teaching that lesson as parents, respect, self-control, order, concentration, channeling energies. Seth is very, very energetic. From the moment he gets up to the moment he falls asleep, he's on the go. And it's very important to have to channel these energies. And the countryside, gives opportunities, good opportunities for that. Contentment, being content with what he has, that's another important lesson. Serving others, not being self-centered, but thinking of others. And I always tell him that it starts in the home before, we help people out of the home. Okay, yes. So I'm going to stop there. I've gone quite a while. So
the end of all things is near at hand. The signs are rapidly fulfilling. Yet it would seem that but few realize that the day of the Lord is coming. The end of all things is near at hand. The signs are rapidly fulfilling. Yet it would seem that but few realize that the day of the Lord is coming swiftly, silently, as a thief in the night. Many are saying peace and safety, unless they are watching and waiting for their Lord. They will be taken as in a snare, a science of the devil. What is soon coming upon us?